afternoon, everyone. Thank you for dialing in for today's press conference. Please continue standing by. The conference will begin momentarily. To ask a question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please ensure that your line is unmuted, and please record your name and affiliation to be introduced to ask your question. The call is being recorded, and if you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Please continue to stand by for today's press conference. We will begin momentarily. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to today's press conference. At this time, you are on listen only until the question and answer portion of our call, at which time you will be prompted to press star 1. Please ensure that your line is unmuted, and please record your name and affiliation to be introduced to ask your question. The conference is being recorded, and if you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. I will now turn the conference over to your host, Mr. Josh Finch. Sir, you may proceed.
Good afternoon. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's media teleconference on NASA's Boeing crew flight test. I'm Josh Finch with NASA's Office of Communications. Leadership joining me with opening remarks on the mission, as well as to talk about NASA's overall review process for its human spaceflight missions. We have Ken Bowersox, Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate, Russ DeLoach, Chief of NASA's Office of Safety and Mission Assurance, and NASA Chief Astronaut Joe Acaba. Although not providing opening remarks, but here to answer questions, we have Joe Montalbano, Deputy Associate Administrator for NASA's Space Operations Mission Directorate, and Emily Nelson, Chief Flight Director of NASA's Flight Operations. We'll begin with opening comments from Ken.
Hey, Josh, thanks, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate your interest and the time that you spend with us. I want to set expectations first. We don't have any major announcements today, but we did want to spend some time with you going through our process for how we make flight readiness decisions, and to give you a little bit of status information. Our technical experts are all busy diving deeply into all the data that's been generated over the past few weeks, going through the feedback of new propulsion system experts that have been brought in, looking at planning for our return options, and preparing for some decision points that are ahead at the program control board and eventually a flight readiness review. The way it works at NASA before a normal launch, we have a lot of readiness reviews at programs with our technical authorities, and the results of those reviews come to an agency board called the Flight Readiness Review. Typically, that's right before launch, where we bring in representatives from all of the related centers, the technical authorities, the programs, the NASA Engineering and Safety Center, Flight Operations. We get everybody together. We listen to the status of the mission, go through some special topics, and then we poll everybody at the end on whether or not they think we're ready to undertake the mission. At that point, typically we turn mission execution over to a flight control team for any time-critical operations, anything that can be handled with our flight rules. And we have a mission management team that we funnel all of our management inputs through to get information to the flight control team. If we have more time or an especially critical issue, we can go back and revisit some of that lower level program and organizational board process and come back to another flight readiness review. And in this case, we've got time, and it's a fairly major discussion to decide about whether or not we're going to have crew on board Starliner for return. So we're anticipating another flight readiness review meeting after the programs have had a chance to meet. The timing for those meetings, we're expecting that the data analysis will be ready for a program board middle to end of next week, and that would be ready for a flight readiness review around the end of next week, potentially beginning of the following week. We've got some flexibility there. I know everybody would like a date. We've got some working dates, but I know that we need to maintain that flexibility so that we make sure that we're ready for the meeting before we have it, right? We don't want to just come to the meeting before we've had a chance to process all the information. We've got time available before we bring Starliner home, and we want to use that time wisely. Right now, Butch and Sonny are well engaged on board the International Space Station. I know if I was in their position, I'd be really happy to be there, and I'd be happy to have the extra time. It's great to be there, enjoying the environment, eating that great space food, and being able to look out the window. So I know that they're making the best of this time, but I'm sure they're eager for a decision just like the rest of us. And when we have that, we will be sure to get together with the rest of you and share that information. And now I'd like to pass the microphone over to Russ.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you.
All right, thanks. Hey, so as Ken said, I'm Russ DeLoach. I'm the Chief of SNMA for NASA. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, sharing this information. Safety is a core value of NASA, and one way we ensure that it is incorporated into our decision-making process is through the use of what we call the Technical Authority Governance Model, and that's been something that we've been doing for over 20 years now. The agency has 3 technical authorities. I represent one, Safety and Mission Assurance. There is also the Chief Engineer and the Chief Health and Medical Officer. So we are required independent elements in key decisions within human spaceflight, including this one we are discussing today, the return of our crew and the Boeing Starliner. As the program works through the data and analysis with its provider, Boeing, the tech authorities have personnel embedded in these teams, gaining insight and providing inputs throughout. Ultimately, the program will reach its conclusion and bring a recommendation forward to an agency-level review chaired by Ken, with the 3 technical authorities part of the go, no-go poll that Ken will do. And our positions will be informed by the engagement of our people throughout this effort. It is also the role of the tech authorities to ensure that views and perspectives of our diverse workforce are able to be expressed and appropriately considered. This robust exchange of viewpoints is a necessary aspect of a healthy safety culture important to the success of human spaceflight. I see that this is occurring, as it should, as we work through this issue. I've been very impressed with the NASA and Boeing teams working this. They have been at this very hard for a very long time, very dedicated to get to the right answer, whatever that might be. And I am confident that our process is moving to a good decision for the right path to get both Starliner and her crew home. And now I'll turn it over to Joe Acaba, Chief of the Crew Office, for his opening remarks.
Thanks, Russ. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in our agency's crew flight test. I do want to emphasize the test flight aspect of this mission. As astronauts, we embark on missions fully aware of the various scenarios and outcomes that may become our realities. We undergo rigorous training to prepare both mentally and physically for the challenges that may arise during any given mission. This mission is a test flight, and as Butch and Sunny expressed, ahead of their launch, they knew this mission might not be perfect. Human spaceflight is inherently risky, and as astronauts, we accept that as part of the job. Right now, the agency has taken the time to ensure we are not putting the crew at a higher risk than is necessary. And as astronauts, that's always something worth waiting for. As Starliner's first flight with crew, Butch and Sunny gave the ground teams feedback and data on the spacecraft, both during the ride up and now docked to the International Space Station. That added human element continues to be extremely helpful for our teams on the ground. Butch and Sunny have also contributed to countless hours of science and research, which I know our ISS program is very thankful for. As most of you know, Butch and Sunny are very familiar with life aboard the space station. This is their third station mission for both of them. I do want to put this into perspective. If Butch and Sunny do not come home on Starliner and they are kept aboard the station, they will have about 8 months on orbit. We have done multiple successful long-duration missions, even up to a year. Those missions have given us volumes of data about the effects of long-duration spaceflight that we continue to use in space exploration. As I assign crew members to a flight and before they launch, we discuss nominal and potential off-nominal mission durations. They are always prepared. We are lucky to be in a time in human spaceflight where we have regular resupply missions, enabling the crews aboard the station to receive any extra supplies they may need, and where an 8-month mission falls within our standard long-duration mission timeframe. I've talked to Butch and Sunny a number of times throughout their stay, and they continue to be committed to the mission. They are proud to represent our nation, and they continue to show their readiness and resilience. We are proud of all of our current expedition crew aboard the International Space Station as we work through this process. We are proud of the teams on the ground, and we know our CFT crew, Butch and Sunny, will be ready to support the direction our agency chooses. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to our speakers for your opening remarks. We'll now turn it over to the question and answer portion. As a reminder, you can press *1 if you'd like to enter the queue, and we are asking you to state your name and affiliation, and if you could keep it to one question. We can come back around for more within the hour that we have as we get through the questions, but we want to make sure we get to as many individuals as we can during the time that we have. And with that, I will turn it over to the operator for the media questions. Thanks.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, please press *1 and record your name. Our first question is from Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press. Your line is open.
Yes, hi, thank you. Last week you said there was an increased likelihood of using SpaceX to get Butch and Sunny back. Are the chances even greater now? And after more than 2 months of dealing with all these problems, what could you possibly learn in the next week to convince you to choose Starliner over Dragon? Thanks.
Hey, Marcia, I wouldn't say anything has really changed in the last week as far as that likelihood. We are getting new data, and it's interesting how, as time goes on, we've got new folks that, as they become aware of what's going on, they're offering inputs and expertise, and it's been very valuable. Sometimes it takes a while for that to come in, that information to come in, but we are seeing some things that are different. A lot of it's confirming what we already knew, but we are seeing some information that has expanded our understanding. So that's been really important.
Thank you. Our next question is from Bill Harwood with CBS News. Your line is open.
Thank you. I think this is for Russ DeLoach or maybe Ken. If the Starliner comes down without a crew on board, and even if it's a fully automated, successful reentry, it goes well, you get the craft back, does that qualify as a loss of mission from a mishap reporting standpoint? I was looking through the guidelines this week, and it appears that would be classified as a top-tier Type A mishap. At least that's how I read the webpage. Is that correct? And if so, what would that mean in terms of post-flight investigation, corrective action, costs, et cetera?
I'll let Russ talk the details. All I'll say is whether it's classified as a mishap or not, we will do a very in-depth analysis of the mission, right, just because it was a flight test. But as far as the technicalities of what we call that investigation, I'll pass that to Russ.
Yeah, and Bill, that's interesting you asked that, because that came up actually a couple weeks ago inside my team, and we talked to the agency mishap program manager, and as well as with the commercial crew program folks, and our conclusion was that by the program's mishap plan, if we, NASA, at this point, kind of intervene and make the call to kind of change the mission, that the crew would ride home on something other than Starliner, that we don't necessarily need to consider that a NASA mishap. As Ken said, we're still going to do all the investigation to understand, even where we got today. But right now, the view inside the NASA mishap program community is that does not necessarily mean that we have to label that a mishap. Now, a mishap could still occur later if for some reason there's some event that happens when Starliner is flying uncrewed home. But just the fact that if NASA steps in and says, hey, we now want our crew to fly home on another vehicle, that in itself shouldn't be classified as a mishap.
But taking the crew off, wouldn't that be a mission failure in this context?
I think my view is that it's really within Ken and Steve's purview to sort of define what the mission is. And if they decide to redefine it that way, I think that's something that they could consider.
Okay, thanks.
And because it's a test mission, I think we have a little more flexibility there, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kristen Fisher with CNN. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you guys so much for holding another press conference. Really appreciate it. Two things, I believe they are for Ken. First, in previous news conferences, you all have said that Starliner, no matter what, whether or not it brings Butch and Sunny back to Earth, that it is still safe in an emergency situation. Is that still the case? And then my second question is just the timing of this decision-making in terms of last week you all said you needed to make a decision by mid-August. Now it looks like we're pushing it back to end of August. Is there a hard deadline on when you all have to make a decision by, or an updated deadline, given the fact that there are so many different constraints with time, specifically the batteries needing to be recharged and whatnot. What is that drop dead time frame for when you all have to make this decision by? Thank you.
Hey, let's do the second question first. In this situation, we don't have a sharp cutoff, right? We can juggle things and make things work if we need to extend, but it's getting a lot harder. It's with the consumables we're using, with the need for the use of the ports for cargo missions, those types of things. We're reaching a point where that last week in August, we really should be making a call, if not sooner.
Hey, Kristen, could you repeat your first question, please?
Sure. My question was, is Starliner still cleared for Butch and Sunny to return to Earth in an emergency situation?
Yes, Starliner is still the contingency vehicle for Butch and Sunny. We've looked at that, and when you consider the low probability of exercising a contingency, we think the risk is reasonable to put Butch and Sunny on that vehicle in a contingency.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Joy Roulette with Reuters. Your line is open.
Thanks. For Ken, I just wanted to quickly follow up on your response to Marcia's question earlier. Could you kind of explain and give a little bit more detail on what you're seeing more recently that you said expanded your understanding of Starliner? Like, exactly what are we talking about there? And then is it still thrusters that you guys are mainly looking at, or are there parachute issues or any other things that might come up on the return journey that is factoring into your decision-making here? Thanks.
The main thing we're looking at is the propulsion system, and the kind of information we're getting is there's a lot of folks out there that have worked with similar thrusters and have seen similar issues, and so we've gotten feedback on what we're seeing, and a lot of it is confirming what we thought was causing the signatures that we were observing on orbit. You know, it's really tough when you don't have the actual hardware to look at, right, when it's up in space. So we brought in folks from our robotic spaceflight community at Glenn and at the Goddard Space Flight Center at JPL. They're used to analyzing propulsion systems when spacecraft are millions of miles away, and they provided some useful input to us. And then as far as the other issues, it's mostly just the prop system that we're tracking. We're always tracking a ton of issues, but I wouldn't say there are any other ones out there that are the major factor for this decision on a crewed or uncrewed return.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is from Michael Sheets with CNBC. Your line is open.
Hi, everybody. This is Michael Sheets, CNBC. I have a question for Russ. I was, like Bill, earlier reviewing some of the old commercial crew documents. I saw the acceptable loss of crew failure rate is 1 in 270. I believe that's still current for the commercial crew program. I know that things are changing and that you guys are getting new data in, but Russ, where is the current calculation for a loss of crew probability based off the information that you have right now? Thank you.
Yeah, Michael, to the best of my knowledge, that analysis has not been updated, as part of this mission operation.
So are you saying that you don't know what it is? I'm a little bit unclear about your answer.
Yeah, it takes a long time to do that analysis, right? So it's not something that we typically adjust real time. So I wouldn't expect that from Russ's team. Russ, anything else you wanted to add?
I was just going to add, that the way that requirement was established, it was really a design certification requirement. So it was all about getting it established as part of design certification, and I am unaware of any requirement to update it through the course of mission operations. So yeah, the answer is it's not actively being updated as the operation is commencing.
Thank you. Our next question is from Micah Maidenberg with the Wall Street Journal. Your line is open.
Thank you. This is for perhaps Joe Acaba. Has Butch and Sonny specifically been asked about whether they would do the nominal Starliner return, given the data that has been collected and the understanding of risk? If they have, what was their response, and how does that response weigh in with the broader decision-making at NASA about whether to go with Starliner or Crew Dragon? And if they haven't been asked, will they be asked at some point? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so I've spoken, like I said, quite a bit with Butch and Sonny. They are receiving a lot of information that we are reviewing here on the ground. I do ask for their opinion, but when I talk to them, they are relying on us on the ground to analyze the data and to come up with a decision. And they will do what we ask them to do, and that's their job as astronauts.
Okay, so they've never stated a preference or view about the nominal return plan, or?
Yeah, I would just say this is not really a preference thing. They are going to wait for us to analyze the data and to come up with a decision. And again, they will do what we ask them to do.
Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lauren Grush with Bloomberg. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you so much. During the last press conference, you mentioned you had pulled in propulsion experts from various NASA centers to help. I'm curious if you can just kind of illustrate how many people and teams you have working on this decision right now.
Well, we basically set up a separate team led by the head of engineering at Johnson Space Center. And I'd say that team was roughly 10 people. There were 6 folks from the centers that I mentioned earlier that do robotic space flight, plus specialists from Marshall, Johnson Space Center, Kennedy Space Center. So we brought in a bunch of folks from around the agency and took sort of a focused look, led by a different person, to come up with whatever conclusions they could from looking at the data. But they didn't generate new data, right? They looked at our existing data.
Thank you. Our next question is from Kenneth Chang with the New York Times. Your line is open.
Great, thank you. This is for Mr. DeLoach and Mr. Acaba, probably for Ken Bowersox too. Could you talk about how you think about acceptable risk when, as Joe said, everything astronauts do in space is inherently risky? I know this is complicated because of the uncertainties and you haven't calculated numbers for this mission, but if you thought Starliner was likely to fail during a return, you would have made your decision and be well into the Crew Dragon preparation. I suspect even the odds for loss of crew are 1 in 10. That is, if there was a 90% chance that Sonny and Butch would return safely on Starliner, you go, whoa, that risk is too high. But if the odds were 1 in 100, maybe that would be acceptable because that'd be safer than the space shuttle tour. So what do you accept as acceptable risk, and how will you make that call when you cannot know for certain how it will turn out? Thank you.
You described the challenge with that pretty well. And so let me tell you how I do that, right? First, I start with an understanding of the baseline risk, and I think about the risk of whatever new plan we might need to go to if that baseline risk goes up. And then I try to get as much education as I can, because the best way to make risk decisions is with the best information. And then finally, I know other people may see things that I don't, so I pay attention to the rest of the members of the team. If our technical authorities have a different opinion than I do, that makes a big difference to me. It may mean that I'm looking at something a different way, that we need to spend more time discussing the issue in order to see if we can get to consensus. If we can get to consensus, all see the risk the same way, then I think we have a higher likelihood of a positive outcome. That doesn't mean that we necessarily have to have consensus to make the call. There are some times where you just have to make a decision and you don't have time to bring everybody into agreement. And in those situations, our process is set up to get us a decision when we need it. But those are all the factors that I look at. And the challenge in this situation is the alternative plan raises risk. We've got increased risk on the baseline plan, and we always knew that a test flight potentially was a bit higher risk than return with a vehicle that has a lot of flights under its belt. So those are the things that we're working back and forth and trying to work together as a team. Russ or Joe, anything you want to add on your approach and thoughts on risk management?
No, I agree that the question is exactly the crux of the matter, and why it's really taken some time to work through this and getting experts together, because we don't have enough insight and data to make some sort of simple black and white calculation says this is what you should do or not do. And I think that's why we bring a series of experts in from different backgrounds, gives just different perspectives, and that means there is different opinions. I mean, there's a lot of engineering judgment that goes into this, looking at the anomalies and trying to bound the cases of what could be going on and what's potentially the worst case. And if the worst case happens, what are the potential consequences? And I mean, I think that's really what the teams have been working hard trying to figure out over the last couple of months.
Yeah, and this is Joe. As you know, astronauts, we're not really looking at those numbers. And like I said in my introduction, we all went into this knowing that this is a flight test, and with that, it does come with some risk. And again, Butch and Sonny were aware of that when they accepted this mission, and they understand that throughout. And I'll hand it over to Emily as well.
Yeah, once we get in flight, it's not always useful to try to put a succinct number on the risk that you're trying to weigh, because you're going to fool yourself if you think you can measure it that closely. That's, as Russ pointed out earlier, that's more of a certification. That's a pre-flight method of assessing risk. Once we're in flight, we can use some numbers to try and gauge where we think the risk is, but honestly, you're then trying to measure with a ruler and cut with a chainsaw. So we have to look a little more holistically at all of the information that we have available. It's really valuable to get experts who have a totally different perspective to come in and look at the data that we've pulled together as we try to understand what it is we may not understand. Like we have a lot of confidence in this spacecraft, and we're trying to make sure that we fully understand the unknowns before we make a final decision. And luckily, the space station provides us the capability to take our time and understand that as best as we can.
Since four of us have answered, I'm going to get Joel Montalbano, my technical deputy, to answer too. As station program manager, he got to weigh in on a lot of risk decisions, and I think it'd be good for him to weigh on the idea of philosophy of risk decisions.
No, thanks, Ken, and Emily summarized it great. Kind of adding to what Russ was saying about use those numbers pre-flight, and then once you get into flight, you go look at the actual systems, what's happening, and look at fault tolerance, look at all that work, and then make the call.
Thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Jeff Brumfield with the National Public Radio. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. My question is, first of all, you mentioned you're doing this readiness review. I was wondering how often this happens mid-mission like this. When was the last time you had to do one of these midway through a mission? And then secondly, I know you've said this before, you'll probably have to say it a lot again, but what is the primary concern here about bringing them back on Starliner at the moment based on the data you have? Thank you.
So I can't remember ever doing a flight readiness review mid-mission. I think we had senior level management meetings, but not necessarily flight readiness reviews. Anybody else on the line who remembers us doing this on a previous mission? I know we've done flight readiness reviews for topics where we wanted additional scrutiny, where we typically would have done a review at a lower level. But as far as mid-mission, this is different. Anybody else who remembers one?
Hey, Ken, I don't know if we called it an FRR, but we had something very similar for the SpaceX, the first crewed demo flight for the SpaceX mission.
Yeah, this is Emily. I was going to note that whether you call it a flight readiness review or just a readiness review, before each major milestone, especially on a test flight, we will execute a thorough readiness review. We don't always pull in agency leadership for those conversations specifically, but we certainly review our readiness before each dynamic milestone.
And it sounds like we had a different name for it back on that mission you mentioned, Emily. We called it a NASA-led MMT or something like that, or a Mission Risk Acceptance Forum.
Yeah,
but we have the flexibility to give it a different name, right? It's a little bit outside of our nominal process.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mark Carew with Aviation Week and Space Technology. Your line is open, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. I have kind of a two-part question. Is any assessment going on about bringing Butch and Sonny back on the Crew 8 mission, adding them to the 4 coming back? And is there anything that could be done to keep the service module on Starliner? I know it gets ejected when you re-enter. I just wondered if there's anything you could do, spacewalk or software wise, to try to get that back. Thank you.
That sounds like a good question for Joel or Emily.
I would say at this time we're not looking at Crew 8. And then on the keeping the service module, doing a spacewalk or anything, we are not looking at either of those. Just the way the system is designed, right now we just don't get this hardware back, and there's not much we can do in real time. So I would say no to both of those.
And just for context, the engines and the piece parts that we're looking at most closely are all pretty small, so that's not really EVA-able, if I can create a new word.
Yeah, I think I probably missed the part of a previous question, but our big concern is having a successful deorbit burn, making sure that the prop system works just the way it needs to all the way through the deorbit burn. And that's why we're looking so closely at the thruster jets and even thinking about how the larger thrusters work.
Thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Jeff Faust with Space News. Your line is open.
Good afternoon. A question for Ken or anyone else who wants to weigh in. What data or analysis do you expect to see or hope to see between now and the end of next week to inform that upcoming flight readiness review? Basically, what do you expect to learn in the next week and a half to enable you to make a decision on Starliner? Thanks.
The major piece of analysis that we're waiting for is a kind of a detailed 3D model of the system inside the valve to see if we can model the effects. That'll feed into the program boards and discussions. They'll go through all the data they've gotten so far, and then the program will make a recommendation. Our tech authorities, some of the other organizations may want to have their own reviews, and then if they're not satisfied with the work at the control board, and then that would bring a recommendation from the control board forward to that management level review.
Thank you for your question. Our next question is from Stephen Clark with Ars Technica. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you all for doing this press availability. I think my question, to go around the horn to the panelists, to Emily, Joe, and Russ, and Sox, if you want to weigh in, please do. Can you talk about where you were at the last program control board meeting last week. I think, did any of your organizations dissent on bringing the crew home on Starliner based on the data that was presented at that meeting? Thanks.
Well, I guess I can start. So I considered our last conversation to be a really good opportunity for everybody who's been kind of soaking in all of the data that we've been collecting to provide an update on where they are in interpreting that data. And then you can draw from that the open questions, the things that we really need to go after as we're looking to figure out our readiness to undock and come home. And so it was mostly a really good opportunity to get a nice, clear list of questions. And now the Boeing team has run with those questions and is working to make sure that we're focusing all of our efforts on the specific areas that each part of the community wants to see additional information on. So it was a good clarifying moment, I think.
Thank you. And our next question is from Will Robinson Smith with Space Flight Now. Your line is open.
Yes, thanks for taking the time to answer our questions today. Want to follow up on a question from my colleague Stephen Young last week regarding if Starliner comes back uncrewed, sort of what happens then. Was any specific equipment, in particular SpaceX flight suits, sent up on the recent Cygnus flight for Butch and Sunny? And sort of couched within that, you know, once Starliner undocks and in sort of in preparation for Crew 9 to launch the space station, in that interim period, how would the Crew 8 Dragon be used as a lifeboat for Butch and Sunny? Like, do they have any special equipment for them to be able to do that in an emergency situation, or can they modify their current Boeing flight suits to be able to work with the Dragon on station in that scenario? Clarification would be great. Thanks.
That sounds like a good Joel or Emily question.
I would tell you that we, from a suit standpoint, they're really not interchangeable. You can't have a Boeing suit and a SpaceX or a SpaceX suit in a Boeing vehicle, and so that would not be the plan. For contingencies, I think you were asking for contingencies. They would come home, you know, like we said in the Starliner. If the Starliner undocks and there's only a Dragon, they would come home unsuited in the Dragon. Let's see, Emily, you want to add? And then I think you had one other question.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that that's a configuration that we're kind of accustomed to. You know, we're NASA. We have backup plans for our backup plans. And so at least inside of operations, we'll take a look at what would we need to do in a worst case. So that's not new to this particular situation.
Thank you. Our next question will be from Josh Dinner with Space.com. Your line is open.
Hi, thank you so much. At this point, does NASA think Starliner may possibly be facing a critical design flaw? And if that's the case, is there any potential that this is the spacecraft's final flight to the space station?
Well, all I can say is that our intent is to keep pressing to have two providers. We've got two very good companies, and we want to develop two strong and capable spacecraft. We think we still have a very good chance of doing that, but the answer is always in the data, right? That's why we're doing this mission. We're going to analyze the data, and we'll be driven in our next decisions by that data.
Thank you for your question. Our next question is from Tim Fernhold with Spaceload Space. Your line is open.
Hello, everyone. This is Tim Fernhold for Payload Space. First question, I just wanted to follow up on what Stephen asked because it didn't get answered. Did anybody dissent during the program control board meeting last week? And can you say who that was? And then I was curious myself how the flight readiness review interacts with the agency level review that's going on. I guess, Ken, you are the decider, but you mentioned last week it could get kicked to Jim Free or Administrator Nelson. Can you talk about what scenarios would lead to decisions going from the Flight Readiness Review Board to you, to Jim, to Administrator Nelson? Thank you.
Yeah, so let me start off talking about the PCB a little bit. There weren't really any formal dissenting opinions out of the Program Control Board because they really did sort of an informal polling, right? And at that, when they went around the room and asked everybody what they thought, there were some folks who said, hey, if we can get this data, then we could get to yes. There were some that said, hey, we think we're at a no. And then there were some that were at a yes, right? But again, the process is still ongoing, so we don't have formal dissenting opinions yet. The flight readiness review that I keep talking about is an agency flight readiness review. There can be lower organizational flight readiness reviews that come together prior to that agency review. At the agency review, I go ahead and say what my call is, my decision is. At that point, we could have a persistent dissenting opinion. It could come up after a PCB and then be raised at the flight readiness review. It could be elevated beyond that agency flight readiness review, and then it would go to Jim Free. At that point, all of our authority is delegated from the administrator. So in this case, the administrator could decide that he wants to weigh in on the discussion too, or he could decide that he's going to allow Jim or my decision to stand. That's my simple description. And Russ knows a lot more about the process. Russ, anything you want to correct me on? If I got it wrong, go ahead.
No, I think you're exactly right. And I mean, I don't want to sound like, we're doing technicalities here, or legalese engineering, but you're right. I mean, a formal dissent happens, when a decision is made, and this was, I would call it, sort of pre-decisional polling about where people stood. And I will tell you how I took the question that I heard. It really was, do you feel like you have all the data you would need now to make a good decision? And to me, most people were at, no, we need a little more work, and that's why we're continuing to work it. There was a few people that seemed to already be there, but I felt like most of the people were, no, I think we need to do a little more work to get us to a place where we can make a good decision. So that's how I took it. So I didn't hear those as dissents. It was, yeah, we need to pursue more data if we can.
Thank you for your question. Our next question is from Morgan McFall Johnson with Business Insider. Your line is open.
You've mentioned a couple times, of course, that there are risks with both options. Can you explain what specifically are the risks with the alternative plan, bringing them back on Crew Dragon? Are you just referring to the extra months of radiation exposure, or are there other safety or health risks that you're considering? Thanks.
So we can let other folks weigh in on this. The type of risks that I see if we go with the uncrewed return for Starliner is, as you mentioned, there's additional radiation for Butch and Sunny. There's additional time on orbit. There is the contingency question. If we use the Dragon as the contingency vehicle for Butch and Sunny, Joel mentioned that they would have to execute a contingency without suits. There are some of our contingency situations that require suits, right? So we don't have full protection in those situations. So those are the types of things that raise the risk level and complicate our decision process.
Thank you. Our next question is from David Curley with Full Throttle. Your line is open.
Thank you very much. Ken Bowersox, it seems like Boeing and NASA are in two different spaces. We haven't heard from Boeing for a little while, but their latest posting suggesting all the data data points that they had hit that they feel like they're ready to go. Can you give us a sense of how that's going between customer and contractor?
So let me just say I've got tremendous respect for Boeing and the Boeing team. And that respect has grown through this process. I think we're all developing, and our relationship is developing through the process. We've had very honest discussions with each other, and I'm not surprised that the Boeing team is 100% behind their vehicle. They have confidence in their vehicle. That's what we would like from them, that they have worked on it so hard and believe in it so strongly that they would be a tremendous supporter for a return on their vehicle. But I can also tell you that they want to work with us in a partnership. What NASA thinks, what the NASA team thinks is important. And when we get to a decision, we'll work through it together.
And this is Joel. I would say, just to be clear, the Boeing team has been in our meetings. So, we talked earlier about bringing some experts across the agency in the propellant area. The Boeing team was in that meeting, asking questions, participating, bringing up discussion points. And so you asked contractor versus NASA. I would say we continue to be badgeless there. And then just to go back to Morgan's question, just so we're clear, the unsuited return, if we decide to bring Starliner home uncrewed, there is a time until Crew 9 gets there where you'd have a contingency, and Butch and Sonny would have to come home, and where Boeing's gone, you still have Crew 8 there, and the contingency, they would come home unsuited. If we make that decision, once Crew 9 gets there, we'll have suits, and they would come home suited on Crew 9. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear. If the decision is made that they come home on Crew 9, they will come home in SpaceX suits on Crew 9.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Joel.
Thank you. Our next question will come from Marcia Smith with SpacePolicyOnline.com. Your line is open.
Thank you so much for taking my question. I think it's mostly for Ken, but also for Russ. And I'm just wondering if both of you could think back to the time of Columbia, and I'm sure there are folks there still from the time of Challenger, and talk about how this process has evolved from what happened with those tragedies. How do you see all of this playing out differently than it might have played out in the past?
So go ahead, Russ. You want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start and then pass it over to you. I really do feel like two things that I feel like I'll point to, and one of them is kind of how I started. We did not have the governance structure that we have today with the technical authorities. So at that time, the program managers pretty much had near unilateral decision making. And so if there were views that maybe a path we were taking was not correct, there was really no strong additional authority to step in and say, wait a minute. And then I think the other thing is, and I'll say for me personally, I've been very hyper-focused lately on this concept of combating organizational silence. If you look at both, unfortunately, Challenger and Columbia, there you could see cases where people had the right data or a valid position to put forward, but the environment just didn't allow it. And I think we've worked a lot harder these days in sensitizing everyone to making sure that we have the right environment for people with different positions can bring them forward. I recognize that may mean at times we don't move very fast because we're getting everything out, and I think you can kind of see that on at play here, where I think some people were like, hey, let's get on with it. But it really is part of that lesson that we learned is you need to have equivalent technical authorities outside of the program, and we need to be very careful to make sure that everybody's perspective is shared. So Ken, over to you.
Yeah, and I was going to say that back around Columbia, we had an input from safety, we had inputs from engineering, we had dissenting opinion process, but it wasn't really called that. I mean, back then we had this thing called the NASA Safety Reporting System, and if you saw something that wasn't good, you were supposed to bring it up, and something could get elevated right away. But what our current process does is it raises the volume on those inputs from the tech authorities, from the safety folks, the engineering folks, from flight crew, the centers, and it gives us a formal way to encourage and to analyze and make a decision on dissenting opinions. So there's still one point where it all comes together, right? And that's up at the top. This gives that person at the top a chance to get the best information when the decision's made.
Thank you for your question. Our next question is from Jackie Waddles with CNN. Your line is open.
Hi, folks. Thanks so much for doing this press conference. Kind of a follow-up to the thought you were just mentioning. So these outside experts that were brought in from, Glenn, Goddard, or JPL, you mentioned that they brought their own expertise related to thrusters like this. Does that mean they specifically had seen, similar Teflon bulge and overheating issues like this? And, what specific missions or experience did they bring? Just kind of want to know more specifics about what these experts said that, gave more pause to the idea of just bringing Butch and Sunny home on Starliner. Thanks.
Well, I think what they added was just expertise on different systems, a lot of different systems, and on the basic physical mechanisms that are causing what we're seeing on orbit. I think our team had already come to a lot of these conclusions, but the new team very quickly was able to come in and show that our team was on what we think is the right track as they analyzed it. And they made a lot of recommendations for how we could proceed in the future after the mission's over. I think that's useful, and we're going to try to keep those folks engaged as we move forward with both the return and after we have Starliner back on Earth. Anybody else want to add their perceptions of how the external group helped us?
This is Emily. One of the things that I've noted was there were a few details about kind of the down and in. You mentioned the Teflon poppet and kind of the physics of what we're seeing in there. We've got some the materials that are left on a thruster after it's fired, like some of those really down and in details, getting a couple of jet experts with very different perspectives and very different experience bases, not even in the first conversation with these experts, but in follow-on conversations to really exchange ideas and information just helps flesh out the rest of the information that we're seeing. And it's been really, really valuable getting to listen to those experts as they work through, well, here's my experience and here's what I've seen. How does that compare to what you're seeing with these jets that we have on orbit today and the testing that you did with those, and how do we compare and contrast those experiences? Getting to hear those experts talk offline has been a really valuable portion of the work that has happened over the last couple of days, and that's going to add a lot to the discussion that we have next week.
Thank you for your question. Our next question is from Carla Hall with the Los Angeles Times. Your line is open.
Hi, thanks so much. I know that Butch and Sunny are veterans of space station work, but they went up there expecting to stay for 8 days. Now they've been there 2 months, and they may be there 8 months. How are they dealing with that? And what are they thinking about all that? And also, how are they spending all these extra days there?
Hey, this is Joe. And so again, with this being a test flight, they went up, and I think the nominal timeline was around 8 days. But when you do a flight like this, you're always thinking, okay, could it be longer? And again, like I told you, when we talk about these flights, you should go in with that expectation that you're going to do a long duration mission. So I actually spoke to both of them in the last day or so, and they're doing fine. In my office, right now I can watch them working on the International Space Station. So they have fully integrated into the increment crew. So they are as busy as any other crew that is up there. But, we are humans, and this is hard on crew members and their families, and we take that into account. But again, as professional astronauts, they're prepared for this, and they're doing great.
And I would add, in terms of what we have been working on, those 8 days was really what our flight teams had determined was the bare minimum of the number of days you had to have on orbit for Butch and Sunny to complete the test mission objectives on orbit. And then, honestly, the team wanted more time. And we, in respect to schedules and everything, you plan for the minimum, and then you're going to take whatever bonus time you get. As soon as we transitioned Butch and Sunny from their specific Starliner test objective activities to becoming full members of the increment crew, of the Expedition 72 crew, one of the very first tasks we had them do was take the spare parts from several different pumps and put those together into a new pump, which was a highly surgical operation that we had not necessarily prepared anybody to do. And these guys are so experienced and have such high capabilities that they honestly raised their hands and volunteered for the task. And that pump is now installed and working great for us and is a part of our life support system. They have been contributing to our research on board. They've been contributing to our maintenance on board. They are just highly integrated members of this crew and are always asking for more work to do, frankly.
Yeah, and I would just add, in addition to the team down here looking at the data, Butch and Sunny know this vehicle about as good as anybody else. When we share that data, they ask great questions, and they're very involved with everything that we are doing here.
Thank you for your question. Our last question for today will be from Jackie Goddard with the Times of London. Your line is open.
Hello, thank you very much. I wondered if anybody could speak about Crew 9, how they're being kept updated, what their input is in any of this, or do they kind of just sit by and wait for news? There's potentially a lot of disappointment coming up for them too. Can somebody give us some insight into how this impacts and how that impact is being managed? Thank you.
Yeah, this is Joe, and I just talked to Crew 9 yesterday, so they are definitely informed of what is going on with CFT and any potential impacts that it could have on their flight. We've moved their launch date from the August timeframe into September, and I think I've said it a few times, but it's kind of part of our jobs, and we realize that launch dates may slip, launch or mission durations may change real time. So again, as professionals, they're doing great. We are all concerned for our crew that is on orbit, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to support those crew members.
Thanks all. This is Josh, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Montalbano for some closing remarks.
Hey, first of all, thank you everyone for your interest. Thank you for your time. Great questions today. We will continue keeping you updated on the mission. Looking forward, tonight we have a Progress resupply vehicle launching out of Baikonur at 10:20 p.m. Central Time. And that vehicle will plan to be docked to the International Space Station Saturday, August 17th at 12:56 a.m. Central Time. So once again, thank you for your interest, and we'll keep you updated.
And that's going to wrap things up here. Thanks all for joining.
This does conclude today's conference call. We thank you all for participating. You may now disconnect and have a great rest of your day.